Hello and welcome to episode 128 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan. I am the father of the most beautiful beast in the world, Jerry. I am one of the co-founders here at ETR, and we are coming off of a late swap kind of week. Yes, that's right. It was a bit of a late swap perfect storm. The duds at the 1 p.m. games from Kareem Hunt, from AJ Green, Jonnu Smith, Darren Waller, Denzel Mims, Titans D, Browns D, and really other popular players. The Dolphins defense was actually popular, and anyone who had them was massively ahead as they went off for 23 Draftkings points. And then also, with late swap considerations, the best game environment on the entire slate was at 4 p.m. Eastern with Seattle, San Francisco. And then Keenan Allen also, who a lot of people had and could choose to swap off of. You know, he was really popular, 25% in the Millie Maker. So there were options. But then the most important part of this whole mess, the most important part of this whole late swap mess, the thing that I was and am still so tilted about was this Jay Glazer report that came on TV only, not Twitter, TV only, at like 12:54 p.m. Eastern. At that time, Glazer says that the Seahawks don't think Chris Carson or Travis Homer or Carlos Hyde would be able to play. And of course, that would leave DJ Dallas as literally the only available running back for Seattle in the best game on the slate. And fuck, man, I love Glazer, but he's just like not in tune at all with fantasy football, which is really, I mean, in my opinion, should be any NFL reporter's number one audience. So Glazer had to have this information well before 12:54 p.m. on Sunday. He just didn't think to tweet it out. You know, save it for TV, you know, save it for the Fox pregame show that only the mouth breathers and the olds watch, you know? Now, if we had this report earlier in time to make lineups, then TJ Dallas at 4K would have been, you know, a stone lock. We had him projected as the second best RB play on DraftKings at cost behind only Jamal Williams if you removed all three of those other running backs. But I didn't see this report until like 12:59, you know, nothing we can do. However, there was something we could do with swapping. And I'm not even talking about cash because I know most of you are playing tournaments. But if you had any or a couple of the guys I previously mentioned and you didn't have Dolphins defense, well, you should have at least considered swapping. Now, the DJ Dallas stuff wasn't as strong once we found out that Glazer was a little wrong and Travis Homer ended up active. But he didn't even practice at all week. Dallas was the one with the more prototypical starting running back size anyway. You know, he goes on to outsnap Travis Homer 56-7, scores 2 touchdowns. Also, a key part of this here was how popular Jimmy Garoppolo projected to be and how strong Russ Wilson was. You know, Justin Herbert was also playing at 4 p.m. and then getting leverage off of the cheaper, more popular Tyler Lockett by switching to the more expensive and less popular DK Metcalf. So, look, I didn't swap in cash because I actually thought that I was ahead. I thought I had enough of a lead by fading Kareem Hunt, playing Derrick Henry, by not having Titans who got -1, by Harrison Bryant and Jonnu Smith, who was super popular, essentially canceling each other out. And I think that was right. You know, the results were obviously terrible because people who did have Hunt and Jonnu and Titans, you know, sharp people made the swap to Russ and Metcalf and Bourne and got off Keenan. And, you know, so I ended up getting tutted. That's the way it goes sometimes. And I know that it can be difficult to figure out when you need to swap and when you don't. The point of this whole rant is A, to get this Jay Glazer tilt off my chest, and B, to at least make you think about late swapping more. Like, this is not something that we only use when there's a late scratch or an obvious injury. The top 1% of DFS players are using it far more than that, you know, which is why I find it so comical when casuals, you know, beg for late swap. Late swap is actually way, way worse for casual guys, but that's another rant altogether. I certainly got a lot wrong in week 8, which I'll get to in a second. One thing I was happy about was kind of bucking the industry norm, the groupthink on Kareem Hunt versus Derrick Henry. I genuinely believe that Henry's floor in any kind of reasonable matchup / projected game flow is far better than people give it credit for. And the ceiling, obviously, the ceiling on Derrick Henry versus Kareem Hunt isn't even close. So please go back and listen to my Derrick Henry rant from episode 122 if you're interested in that. One thing I did get wrong was not prioritizing Dolphins D. I ended up playing Browns D in cash, wanting to leverage the weather some. Only had Miami on 1 of 8 GPP teams. Now, of course, you know, whenever these somewhat popular defenses go off for, you know, 23 points, there are always going to be people who say, man, I wish defense slash special teams wasn't a part of DFS. It's way too varied. It's too hard to project. We can't project, pick sixes and fumble returns and kickoff returns for touchdowns. And I don't know. I mean, I lost a lot on Miami. Like all of my high stakes head to heads opponents in week 8 had Miami somehow. It was so brutal. But I do think that having some increased variance in spots in DFS is good for the overall ecosystem. Like it's like in poker, like if you get it in with aces versus kings, well, the hand isn't over. You still lose 18, 19% of the time. And having that as part of the game, like it's good. It really is. And I'd also add that I do think there's an edge in defense slash special team selection in the long run. I've talked about it a ton in here, using Thorn stuff and understanding projected dropbacks and when to spend on DST. I actually like it. So I'm not one of those people that, got bent over by Miami and then wants D/ST gone. I want to get to Leone's winning Thunderdome team in a second here, but just wanted to point out how being detail oriented really does matter. Like knowing that Jordan Wilkins is active really does matter to Jonathan Taylor. Jordan Howard and Lynn Bowden getting healthy scratched does matter to Myles Gaskin. Knowing that Braxton Berrios is in the slot where Crowder and Landry and even Berrios earlier this year have seen so much volume, that stuff matters. And that's really what I consider, my/our job. You guys have lives, you guys have jobs, you have kids, you have friends, you have the sex. I always considered my job to get you this kind of info so you can make your own decisions, not to tell you exactly who to play or whatever. I hope that makes sense. Okay, let's get to the main event here. For those guys that don't know, the Thunderdome is the highest stakes quote unquote tournament. And I say, quote unquote, because there are only 30 entries. And I think there's a misconception out there in the public that, real high stakes DFS, professional DFS goes down in tournaments like the Millie Maker and other large field lotteries. Like it's just not true. The highest stakes, the most action goes down in 10K 3-mans and small field high stakes 50-50s and small field tournaments like the Thunderdome. And the Thunderdome, of course, is the most extreme example of this. Single entry, 30-man field, $5,300 to get in, 50K to first. So Leone was able to ship it this week with a full KC Jets game stack. Mahomes, Kelsey, Tyreek, bring it back with both Mims and Berrios. All 5 of those guys projected very well, all projected for moderate ownership, though, at most. And even though no weather in KC, even though we know KC scores 5 touchdowns here a ton of the time, even though the injuries to Crowder and Perriman created big opportunities for Mims and Berrios, they still had relatively low projected ownership. And this speaks to a bit to what I think, what I would call blowout fear. Like nobody wanted to click the Chiefs against the Jets because they're like, oh my gosh, Mahomes isn't going to be throwing the ball in the fourth quarter. Well, yeah, like, of course, if the Chiefs are up 25 points in the fourth, then we're not going to get a lot of Mahomes. But how do they get up by 25? How do they get to 35 points? Likely, or at least a reasonable percent of the time, it goes through Mahomes. So it's not like the NBA where sometimes in these blowouts that you see, blowout fears in the NBA, that you see the second unit can be the one that does it. And so, you play LeBron and Anthony Davis, and it's actually the Lakers' second unit that blows out, the worst team in the league or whatever. In the NFL, when the Chiefs blow a team out, it goes through Mahomes or the run game, or like we saw in week 7, D/ST. And so off the dud in week 7, when the Chiefs happened to score 2 defensive/special teams touchdowns and Mahomes/ Kelsey busted, I think this made a lot of sense to get back on the Chiefs here. Leone filled in the rest with essentially chalk, Kareem Hunt and Jamal Williams at running back, Keenan Allen at the flex, Browns defense. Easy game. I find it somewhat amusing. You get people who don't really understand high stakes saying, Leone only scored 163 points. My team beat that. If I only had $5,300, I'd be in there printing. These people are just brain dead, of course. Anyway, I played that same game stack, that same 5-man stack in one of the smaller field single entries as well. But the guys around the game stack I had were Derrick Henry, Myles Gaskin, DeAndre Swift, and Bills. So never a sweat as the field was 500 people deep. But, just a reminder that we don't have to play bad plays, specifically in smaller field stuff. We can play Mahomes stacks against the Jets thoughtfully and still have a pretty contrarian team. Like people are out here playing Nelson Aguilar in the wind and piling onto Le'Veon Bell in a timeshare due to, revenge. Like we don't need to do that stuff, especially as field sizes get smaller, as I mentioned. Okay, before we get to today's listener questions, wanted to remind everyone that we do indeed have a sponsor for this podcast. Yes, this podcast is brought to you by the good people at Underdog Fantasy. If you want some background on them, I'd really recommend going back and listening to episode 82 of this podcast. I did an episode with Jeremy Levitan, the founder, also founded Draft, also very good ping pong player, working on tequila, sports cards. Underdog Fantasy has innovative games that I think a lot of people will enjoy. The concept that is most interesting right now is something they're calling Battle Royale. It's a combination of DFS and best ball. It's really simple. You draft a 6-player roster in a snake draft, but it's a GPP style tournament for 1 week. So the strategy is really interesting. In a 6-round draft, you aren't really going to get deep into the player pool, but I think there's a lot to think about with stacking and trying to find some off the board plays that have a reasonable chance of a spike week. You know, much like regular DFS, you can't just play the optimal and expect to win a large field tournament. So you can get in for $5. First place is $4,000. After you deposit, mention on the pop-up you heard about Underdog on ETR, and you'll be eligible for some ETR swag that we'll have an announcement about soon. Again, underdogfantasy.com. Make sure to enter promo code ETR after you make a deposit. Okay, enough is enough. It is time for everyone's favorite portion of the program, the listener questions. Producer Luke, hit the theme music. All right, as always, got a bunch of sick and twisted questions. Appreciate all of them. Going to do 6 today. Question 1 comes from Tom. He says, curious on the optimal GTO approach to a colonoscopy. Do we even care if a poor doctor has to deal with the unsightly below the belt appearance of the typical 50-year-old male, or do we do our best to be presentable for the good doctor? I mean, first of all, I can't believe that we're here in the year 2020 and the only way to examine our colon, our lower bowels, is by literally shoving a long tube with a camera on it up our asshole. I mean, am I the only one that thinks this is insane? It sounds like something my 5-year-old would come up with. Oh, you need to see something out of plain sight. Let's just attach a camera to it, some kind of pole and figure it out. I'm praying that by the time I'm 45, which, God, I mean, I can't believe, I'll be 45 in 7 years. The thoughts running through my head, my inner monologue right now is the same one I had when I was 16. But anyways, can I just run hot one fucking time in my life and have modern medicine get into my asshole some other way, than the way they currently do a colonoscopy? Anyways, as for the question, I don't really know what to say. I mean, what can we do? I'm not sure if Tom is referring or suggesting that we should shave our asshole before the colonoscopy or get it waxed. I mean, I don't think I can face that. The doctor, I assume, knew what he/she was getting into, right? Like, you got into the tube up the asshole business. It's tough for me to find sympathy for this spot. I will say, though, that, like, I do think screening for cancer and anything else, I mean, I want it all. Like, there's just absolutely zero reason for me to wake up one day and, like, find out that I have stage 4 cancer or something like that. Like, screen me. Please screen me and screen me more. I'll pay, whatever. It seems like a no-brainer. Question 2 comes from Hoyt. He says, if entering 3 max and single entry contest, do you make a different lineup for each entry, or would you make 3 lineups and just pick one of the 3 lineups to enter into the single entry contest? Yeah, I'm not sure I followed this question exactly, but my opinion in general is that if you're a tournament player or even just dabbling in tournaments, you want to make as many lineups as you think you can manage well each week. In other words, like, I'm not taking one lineup and putting that one lineup into all single entry GPPs. I'll make 8 and put them into 8 different single entry GPPs. The idea is that these tournaments are so incredibly top heavy. We really need to get to the top, to make it matter. And there's so much variance. We really, just want to take shots on goal, lots of them. And obviously that's where the 150 entering, the mass multi-entry comes into play. There are very, very few people who can play that format well. But if you can, getting 150 shots on goal to get to the top obviously is better than getting 8 shots on goal. But the number of people doing it that are plus EV, making 150 lineups, is so small. I think that Drew Dinkmeyer is arguably the best at it. He's done a bunch of videos and screencasts about it you can find on our YouTube and on the site. But, anyway, making 5 or 10 or 20 lineups and finding the right contest for them, I think that's a reasonable goal for a lot of people. Question 3 from Gino. Can you discuss more about your transition from poker to DFS? What one do you think is softer currently? Is it easier to control variance in DFS, or is there more? Thanks. Yeah, obviously there's a lot of similarities between poker and DFS. Generally speaking, in both, we have partial information. We take that information, we make the best decisions we can, and at some point, the results are out of our control. In both, we work to develop a strategy we think wins, not score the highest amount of points in DFS or make the most hands in poker, but try to figure out a strategy that actually wins the money. That's a real strategy. I think in terms of how soft, I'd probably say that live poker right now is the softest by a mile, like by a huge amount. Then DFS, then online poker would be the toughest. As for controlling variance in live poker, if you can get in good games, which of course isn't always easy, but if you can get in good live poker games, I certainly think it's viable. Like some of these guys you'll play against in live poker are never, ever, check raising without the stones. Some of them are never even betting without something close to the stones. So you never really get into difficult spots. That said, I think controlling variance in DFS is even more viable because there are so many iterations. We can play hundreds of lineups if we want. We can play dozens of slates a week. We can play showdown and tiers and classic and head to head and large field, all just derivatives off of the same process. In live poker, of course, it really just can't scale at all. And that's what makes it, so brutal. And I think why a lot of people wanted to get out of it. So yeah, the mental aspect of poker and DFS is similar, and I think that's why you see so much crossover among the player pool, just understanding probability, being able to handle losing, developing different strategies, etc. Question 4 from Ben is right there. He says, have you ever tripped on mushrooms? What was it like? And then he says, in parentheses, they are decriminalized in Colorado. Yeah, of course, man, of course. There's a really famous Socrates quote. I believe it's like the unexamined life is not worth living. And God, nothing will make you examine life and our place in it and what we're doing with our time here than good mushrooms. And so, I'm not really into partying or anything like that, but there's a ton of research that shows the positive benefits of psychedelics. There are also a lot of very smart people in all walks of life, successful business people, etc., that have talked about the benefits of microdosing, aka taking a very, very small amount of LSD or psychedelics every day. So you don't trip, but you experience some of the benefits in terms of creativity and positive feelings, outlook on the world, etc. But yeah, man, the bottom line is I'm willing to do almost anything to live a happier, more zen, more peaceful life, therapy, drugs, meditation, whatever works. Question 5 from Bo Dangles. He says, how did DFS pros become pros? Bigger bankrolls, contest selection? They just have an edge over the field because of their skill? Yeah, this question always kind of cracks me up a little bit. Like, pro DFS player, let's think about what that means. This is not like a pro basketball player or a pro tennis player or a pro football player where there is an insane barrier to entry. You have to be 6'5". You have to be one of the top natural athletes on the planet, like 0.0001% of best athletes on the planet. Like the barrier to entry in pro DFS is literally zero. It's not like sports. The barrier to entry, again, in pro DFS is literally zero. So to say things like, oh man, I hate all these pros in DFS, I can never beat them. Well, why? There's literally no reason you can't. What you're really saying is that you want to play for real money, but you want to play against weaker opponents, or you don't want to work as hard, or whatever the case may be. And the reality is that anytime we're playing for money, and in DFS, let's be honest, there's a ton of money up for grabs every day. Anytime that's the case, there are going to be very smart, very driven, very focused people working incredibly hard to earn that money. And so, yeah, anybody can be that guy. Now, if we want to be honest, how many people are actually making a good living exclusively from playing DFS right now? Making 200K plus a year? I have no idea on the exact number, but I would guess less than 50 in the entire player pool. And it's just very, 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 very hard. So it's not something I'd recommend very many people going for. But to suggest that there's some magic potion, there's some allure or some weird thing with pro DFS, that nobody else can have is just wrong. All right, question 6, last question we're going to do today comes from Brad. He says, optimal first date strategy for a recently divorced fella trying to get back on the hashtag team. Do we participate in solo activities prior to said date, Or do we take the athlete route and abstain for 48 hours prior to be in peak readiness? Well, first of all, Brad, sorry to hear about the divorce, man. I got to say, though, from what I've heard, this spot is pretty close to GTO for the team. Like the sims we've been running here at GenderLabs showed that the second most direct path to the team is divorcee to divorcee. Just so much pent up angst. Of course, we know, via Costanza, that the most direct path is actually the widow. Like kill your fiance with cheap wedding envelopes. Your story is the one. You get all the women. But anyways, back to the question. So a lot of the work and research that we've done has shown that solo activities, as Brad suggests, is actually really, really bad for motivation, for performance, for overall mood. Like induces feelings of lethargy and nihilism. Like the team doesn't matter, nothing matters. And that's not what we need. Much like an athlete, as you say, we have to be all in. Like the world depends on getting on the team. So yeah, I would recommend the abstain route. But good luck out there, buddy. Let me know how it goes. All right, that is going to do it for today's solo pod. We'll be back later today with Silva for the team by team breakdowns. For Jerry, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.